Way Media.
Welcome to episode 104 of the Filmumentries podcast. This is Jamie Benning talking to you here from my house in London. It is summer, although you wouldn't know it. It's pretty overcast and cool at the moment. It's just been my birthday yesterday. I'm now 48. 48. Thank you to those that wished me a happy birthday. I had a good day, spent the day with my wife and my daughter, my youngest daughter, and we went for a nice walk in a lovely park near us and had a nice cup of tea and a little treat. Amongst this lovely walled garden that we loved to visit. And whilst our daughter was at school, we chilled out with some fun stuff on the TV. And we went and saw Adam Buxton record a podcast with Louis Theroux just a couple of nights before as a little treat. That was really, really fun. If you don't listen to the Adam Buxton podcast, you probably should. It's very good. And one I've been listening to for a long, long time, since episode 1 actually. And we're having a big family get-together this weekend. My sister is over from the States with her family, and my cousins are visiting with their new babies. It's going to be a really nice get-together of everybody. We haven't all been together for a very long time. So, really looking forward to that. It's going to rain, but we kind of know that, and we accept that. If you're joining me for the first time, thank you. And if you're returning, then it's good to have you back, and I appreciate you joining me again. For those of you that don't support the podcast on Patreon, I just wanted to say that, well, first of all, please support me if you can, because it would be great if I could continue to do this podcast and make a bit of a living out of it. It is work. It's work that I love. It's work that I enjoy, but it is work. And if you enjoy it and you appreciate it, then your support would be appreciated by me. Patreon.com/Jamie Benning. But what I actually was going to say was that I've started a little chat community on Patreon. So if you're one of the patrons, one of the 115 of you now, that help support the podcast, then I just thought it was a nice little chance to interact in our kind of inner circle. And if you want to be part of that inner circle and find out what I'm up to behind the scenes, who I'm about to interview, some of the details, giving you also the opportunity to send me some questions to ask some of these guests, see how the sausage is made, then join via Patreon. It's $1 per month for 12 months. So that's 50 cents an episode. So like $12, which, you probably have spent by the time it gets to 9 a.m. most days. $12, if you could just throw $12 in this direction, it really would make a massive difference. Of the several thousand people that listen to this, if say 300 of you did that, my goodness, that would change things so much. I could get more episodes out. I could spend more of my time focused on this. And if you can't support the podcast in that manner, then just write a review on Apple Podcasts. That would be great. I really do appreciate your support. There's also if you don't want to get involved in the Patreon thing, if you just go to filmumentries.com, there is a donate button. And I know a couple of you have done that. So thank you to you. Thank you to the patrons. I really do appreciate it. Okay, so for this episode, the first one of June 2024, of course, I have a plan of what I'm going to put out, weeks ahead of time. But I sometimes have an opportunity to interview somebody that I didn't expect. I was given the opportunity to interview the visual effects supervisor and producer of Ahsoka, Star Wars series on Disney+, Richard Bluff, of Industrial Light and Magic, and the supervising sound editor, Matthew Wood. I've spoken to Matthew before a little while ago for a Mandalorian Obi-Wan episode. Was that last year? I think that was last year. I remember editing that whilst I was waiting for my wife's TED talk that she did. Look up Becca Benning. She's a health coach. She's amazing, and she did a TED talk. I'm very proud of her. And that episode kind of arose in a similar way to this one. So I know everyone's talking about the new series Acolyte at the moment, which is currently 3 episodes in as we speak. This episode of this podcast is about Ahsoka and about the effects work and about the sound design and how those two things interact, how those two departments have like a two-way street between them these days, and how one can inform the other. So today's the 14th. I'm hopefully going to get it out tonight before I drive up to Norfolk. If I don't, you'll probably be listening to this post the 15th. But I spoke to these two gents on, I think it was the 12th, the day before my birthday, and I turned around the podcast and edited it pretty quickly, cut all the ums and ahs and mistakes that we made along the way. We did have a couple of technical issues with my laptop power dying and Matthew's computer saying it wasn't up to spec when he was clearly on a high-end Mac. There was a problem with the Riverside software that I used to record the podcast, but we got all those problems solved. I was able to get another cable. We were able to restart the recording, and off we went. So without further ado, here's my conversation with ILM's Richard Bluff and Skywalker Sound's Matthew Wood, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Thanks for joining me, guys. Let's talk about Ahsoka then. So let's start with the sound side of the show. So Matthew, you're working on the sound. You're the sound supervising editor. You do additional voices in a lot of these shows as well now. What are the kind of unique challenges in creating an identity for a show? Because we're in the Star Wars universe. We have all of that legacy of Ben Burtt's work and Gary Rydstrom's work and Randy Toms and everything else.
Yeah.
How do you create something unique for a show like Ahsoka?
Well, this one was really fun for us because it was Dave Filoni really culminating like all the work that we had done with him on Clone Wars and Rebels and all that together. And I was able to get my dream team. I was able to have David Acord, who started with me on Clone Wars, and then Bonnie Wild, who started on Rebels. And then so we were able to and mix actually in our carriage house, which is where Filoni first started working on the animated series almost 20 years ago. So it was a real like homecoming for all of us. And that was the main, we needed to have those, myself included, all those players involved just to have that shorthand that we have with Dave. And then he was creating a space that was going to be, in the Star Wars universe, that now we're in an actual galaxy that's far, far away from that. That's another planet where our heroes are sort of stuck on, and a new character, coming in from the books and the animated series with Thrawn. But I think, always in Star Wars, it's always about creature voices and new ships and that kind of thing. And I think we had a lot of opportunity in this one. We had the Purrgil, which were highlit to transport us from one universe to the other, which came from Rebels, and we got to expand upon that. And then also the other fact is we had Kevin Kiner, which was great too, in our music. So, Kevin Kiner and his family did the track for us, and we have a long legacy with Kevin from back in the Clone Wars days. And none of us show up like with a big ego, like vying for space of the frequency range of the track. We just all work together to play the scenes emotionally. And there was a lot of scenes where we're like, hey, why don't we add a cue here or take away a cue here, and just to kind of give it realism or take you down the fantasy of what we're doing. So this was a real labor of love for all of us, and it was a really fun mix, and not a lot of crazy surprises. It just really felt like a good flow that we had with Filoni in the carriage house.
Do you think then, Richard, that, given you're coming off the back of some features, you're coming off the back of another Star Wars show, The Mandalorian as well, was it a matter of kind of optimizing those and getting the team together that had worked on those shows to make sure you had the best chance of creating exactly what you wanted? Or are you always trying to push the techniques that you're using forward each time you do a show like this?
I think you're always pushing the techniques forward for sure. But by the same token, I think you're always learning from the previous shows. I'd worked with Dave on Mandalorian season 1, and then I did season 2 with him, and then the Book of Boba Fett. So we'd had quite a long runway to get to Ahsoka. The whole while Dave would talk about what his vision was to bring Ahsoka to live action. So a lot of those ideas that he would talk to us about, and I've mentioned this before, many, many years prior to starting prep, or even starting to write it, those ideas lasted throughout. So to Matt's point, no surprises. There simply weren't. And again, I think that because we'd worked together for such a long time leading up to the show, we were both able to, I think everybody, all the HODs, everybody involved in the show that was part of the decision-making team were able to kind of zero in on where they felt the efficiencies were and what particular techniques or workflows were going to help Dave achieve his vision, because every filmmaker is different. And I think just to kind of, dovetail into what this conversation is all about, one of the things that's really interesting and has been really interesting on this particular show was how much sound and visuals played off each other. It was very much, it flowed two ways, which is unusual for all the projects I've ever been involved in. Typically, I don't hear the sound until it airs on TV or it's in a movie theater. Whereas the way that Dave works, and particularly the way that Lucasfilm works on these shows, is that sound is involved very, very, very early, because we create a story reel. And Dave obviously wants, Matt and everybody to kind of get involved early. So for us, the typical visual effects workflow is we're constantly chomping at the bit to get the latest cut of the visuals. But on this particular show, that was always the case, despite the fact Dave would always kind of give us the visuals almost immediately when he had a new edit update. He was always telling us, you need to get the updated sound. You need to understand what noises these creatures are making, because it's going to have an impact on how the animators in particular go about the performance of the creatures, whatever they be. And that was different and unusual, but it was really rewarding, and I think really helped to raise the bar and for everything to really feel cohesive.
Yeah, it feels like I've talked to quite a few productions, people who worked on productions, not just Lucasfilm, but elsewhere, just about how sound is being brought on earlier in productions just to kind of inform the visuals in many ways. We would have seen a lot of press about the Dune movie with Mark Mangini and Theo Green talking about, some of the voices that they did in their sound design, and some of the effects for like the shielding when they're fighting and things like that wouldn't have existed previously like this. Like you say, you would have got your visuals and then the sound would have been kind of bolted on at the end. Does that sort of collaborative workflow happen because now we can do things in different time frames? Is that why? Because it's not a destructive process, almost like you would have with, say, film, but you've got a sort of two-way street, if you like. Is it the technology that's driven that?
I mean, tech makes it so we can incorporate our mixes in any of our early work fairly easily through the picture department and onto Richard's team. So it's definitely easier with tech. But I have to say, it's also just an ethos that was done. George Lucas did it back in the day. We started a year, sometimes earlier on the films. I think Ben Burtt started in 1975 working on Star Wars, the first one. So I mean, we get incorporated into the script. We get to have pick our beats in there and just sort of, and then when the animatics are created, we can incorporate into there and then get the material onto Richard and his team at ILM. And I think that's something Kathy Kennedy has maintained. I mean, all the sequel movies, I get to go out to the set and get to see the design scape, hold the props in my hands, go to the actual sets and walk on the Millennium Falcon and whatnot. So, in MBS, where we did a lot of Ahsoka, I got to, do the same thing, be down there and talk to people and meet people. And I always try to get the early, like, even if there's dialogue, any dialogue, I try to get as early as possible with the most highest quality version possible. So if somebody likes it, we can use it all the way to the end. And that was one of the early sound design moments, I think, was with the Noti creatures. We wanted to make sure we had a nice language that was working for Dave. And so David Acord came up with this language for the creatures that then our voice team went and performed, and we were able to get that over to ILM pretty early and use that. And I think that really helped. I mean, the voices and the visuals all together really make these little cute creatures come to life. And that was a fun moment for all of us too.
Definitely. Talk about using the right tools for the right thing at the right time quite often in these chats, because you've got a lot of tools at your disposal. Why then, Richard, do you go down the route of a practical effect for Ahsoka's ship? Because it seems that you'd have more control, perhaps as a CG model? You might even have money saving involved if you used it as a CG model. Why do you go down the route of doing something practically? What's the attraction there, and how does that kind of help drive the story?
It's interesting. My involvement with miniatures recently, of course, obviously I joined Island 20 years ago when they were far more widespread, but it was for the Razor Crest. And specifically for that ship, it was a very reflective surface. And so at the time, Jon Favreau had lots of questions about how you light a chrome ship in space when everything's reflecting off its surface is black, and you almost certainly always have just one key light, a little bit of fill, but you're not really going to pick up the fill on something that's reflective. And so it became a real conundrum for him. And at the time, we brought John Nolan to have these conversations with Jon, because he'd done that with Padme's ship in The Phantom Menace, and he talked about the tricks that he used. And I think Jon was really interested at that time as to why a miniature wasn't used. And we got into a philosophical conversation as to whether the technology on the computer should drive the look of something and be trusting in the math effectively, and or whether you should actually build a miniature model and get a DP to light it, because it's really it's an artistic problem to solve, because it's not real science. And so Jon Nolan and I kind of went away and said, well, why don't we pitch the idea of building a miniature and we have the DP light it on set with some black duvetine around there. And so it starts to answer questions quicker rather than spending the time to curate the 3D model and then have an artist start to light it when they have to because they'll have to build, a digital set, whatever that is, whether it's deep space with key lights or with fill lights. So we decided to do that as a lighting study. And then as we very quickly started walking down this path, it was Jon Nolan that suggested that, I could probably build a motion control rig, and we could probably get some shots in camera like this that would also help inform the flight dynamics, because we knew at the time that Favreau wanted to restrict the motion of our CG spaceships to feel more akin to the original movies. And obviously, what made the original movies successful, and there's, thousands of answers to that question, but one of them was just the nature of the motion control, which was cutting edge at the time. But the more you kind of move away from that restrictive flight style, the more everything feels a little bit freed up and doesn't feel like Star Wars anymore. So that for us, it was a grounding. And then that proved to be very successful. And then as we kind of moved forward to Ahsoka, Dave really felt it was helpful for him to have a physical model in his hand, because he likes to use his iPhone to kind of frame up on shots, take a snapshot, and then he'll draw an image as a storyboard. So he's very much of the world of, I like a physical model with a lipstick camera where I can kind of get in there and find my angles. Because again, every filmmaker's different. At the same time, he really wanted to build this model to be used in the show. But on top of that, it was an Easter egg at Celebration. Celebration happened while we were shooting the show. There was no press out prior to that show in terms of what the show was going to look like. And Dave wanted to hide the T6 miniature at Celebration with all the other models and just kind of see what sort of buzz it was going to get, to take the temperature. And so all of those things really factored into why it was made. But more importantly, it was made because we were going to put it on screen. So we did get, quite a number of shots with that miniature. But it also helped inform the detail, the lighting as well. And also it provided us an understanding of what sort of guardrails we wanted to put around the flight of that ship. And then after that, Gerald made a beautiful 3D model that matched not only the miniature, but also the physical set, which then ended up playing in over 500 shots. So, many, 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 many times more than the miniature, but we had a grounding before we got to that point. So there was no question about how it was going to react to the light. It was a really incredibly helpful tool.
Mm. Yeah, I spoke briefly to John Goodson. I visited the ranch in April and I bumped into him. I was there with Lorne Peterson and they were catching up, and he was talking about the model and just about some of the the difficulties in mounting it, because it's quite an
Yeah.
unusual ship in that it rotates around that center point and is at that 45-degree angle. What were the particular challenges in doing that?
I think that's the honestly, um, John is the best person to speak about that stuff. But what's interesting throughout this process that John will highlight that there's a real particular challenge with these miniatures, but because he's been doing it for so many years, there's just complete trust in how he would go about executing it, and all he needed to kind of let John Knoll and I know is where the pick points were. And he was always concerned about wanting to make sure that there was more and more pick points in order to kind of hold the miniature on an arm, on an armature, so the motion control rig could photograph it cleanly. And, you know, I can't quite remember how many points there were to kind of pick this ship, but it was way more than we actually needed. And, you know, proved to be beautiful. You know, the wing even rotates. You know, even though the times when we were going to photograph it, it was largely going to be kind of locked in its either horizontal or vertical position. Even the wing rotated around, and there was people sitting in the cab. It was just, you know, it's a real reminder as to kind of where we've come, and you know what it takes to make something that has such character like the T6, and it reminds you as well as kind of where the detail needs to live. You know, that's something that John Goodson has got so many years of experience bringing to us, and where the amount of detail that he would put into the model is kind of where we would put the same amount of detail into the CG version as well, so it doesn't get too busy. You know, it's a real interesting kind of back and forth and a learning exercise for anybody that spent their entire career largely in the CG world. You know,
Talking about these ships, then, Matthew, you know you've got some great ships in this show. You've got the Eye of Sion, you've got the Vesper, the Republic cruiser, you've got the E-wing, which I remember, of course, from the Dark Empire comics from
Right.
back in the day. How much fun is it to, you know, finally put some of those kind of expanded universe ships on screen, and also to sort of expand upon what we've seen in other shows with some of those sort of different versions of the ships, like the Chimera, for instance, is this, you know, is this modified Star Destroyer. What's the sort of story behind some of those?
Yeah, I think that our favorite to work on our favorite ships, to work on our favorite sort of genre in the show, to work on was all the witchcraft. You know, it was definitely the Eye of Sion, having that ready with the you know hyperspace engines getting locked in, and then we wanted the tech in there to feel like it was generated by some otherworldly force, and then but also have some combustion, like when it finally takes off in that one, and in the episode where they finally get it working and it goes. I mean, that was the handoff between music and sound effects was great there, as we accelerate into that moment where they speed away. And I think, as I recall, we had, you know, we culminated with like alarm sounds going, also the you know the rising tone of the hyperspace engines, and then Kevin Kiner gave us a nice sort of gap to put just sound effects in for the launch. And I think, you know, all that stuff on the Eye of Sion, all the mysterious like sort of holograms that are happening for the characters, because it's not a technical hologram, it's more like a spiritual hologram in a way. So we made the voices and the way they come in and out, similar to the VFX being very sort of organic and mysterious and not tech in that way. Was a fun place to play, along with all the voice of the witches. We'd had, you know, a witch in Clone Wars, Mother Talzin, that we made this really cool pre-verb, you know, mysterious kind of thing where she would speak. And so this time we had three witches, so I was able to record all three actors at the same time, but I put them in isolated booths. And so every single actor did all the lines of the other actors as well. So we had this moment where we could whoever was featured to talk, we would bring that into the foreground, and then you'd hear the reverb and pre-delay and preverb of the other actors in there. So we made it sound really mysterious, like it's in your head that way. And the game, and that was a fun one to do, because it was every single line in the show, so they got to come back together, and I got to watch them sort of set back into where they were when they were shooting it. And they're definitely a linked trio. It was fun to watch them work, and they knew their lines, they knew the cadence. There's a part where they're rising, all the stormtroopers are rising from the dead after they've all been, you know, laid out by our heroes, and they knew that chant like immediately, and the exact cadence we had to get it into. And yeah, just the voice. A lot of the voice cast. We have that additional voices cast that they let me use on all the Lucasfilm projects, and that's just a fun one to bring in because we had all these amazing, horrifically, scary voices from the stormtroopers. So we had those like zombie troopers that we had to. Or I don't know what we were calling them. Not zombies, but I guess they're. I'm not sure what we called them, but they they were rising from the dead, and they had these screams coming through, and we found a good, very like piercing speaker FUTs to use in their headphone on their helmets as it's coming through these horrific screams coming through their helmets. That was another good one.
Yeah, it's pretty horrific. You mentioned a word in there, actually, organic, that kind of came up when I was making my notes earlier today.
Yeah.
And in terms of the visual effects, you look at something like the hyperspace with the Purgles, we're kind of looking at, organic beings flying through hyperspace for the first time. How did you approach that, Richard, in terms of sort of reinventing what hyperspace looks like?
Dave had a very clear idea of kind of how that should appear, and obviously we had reference from the animated shows. So I think for us, the big question was going to be how literal do we want to kind of follow what's been done previously, or do we want to kind of experiment with different versions of this? And one of the challenges actually was that we were going to be photographing scenes on stage in front of our LED screen months before we got into post work on that effect. So we had to kind of have a number of versions of at least what the color could be, to be able to play back on the LED screens, because we wanted that interactive light and the reflections on the floor as well. So, very quickly, kind of Dave started talking about chromatic effects, light splitting as well. And so from that point, he's really good at providing visual reference. So there was lots of imagery that he collected of beam splitting and of light shining through particulate. So then at that point, ILM's got, a wonderful effects department where you can kind of show them all of that material and kind of give them the gross guidelines. And they're pretty good at coming up with lots and lots of different versions, different flavors, because, spinning particles and trailing paths and things, it's what they do really, really well, and explosions and stuff. So there's nothing that they haven't done before. And oftentimes they can kind of bring different ideas into that kind of mix that really kind of pull it together. So for us, it came together rather quickly because Dave had a pretty clear idea of how graphic he wanted it and how realistic he wanted it. And I think from that point on, the biggest challenge was, how do we communicate the fact that the Purgle feels like it's moving within that space and it's connected somehow? And we talked about wind flow, actually. I kept talking about Formula One, and I kept talking about wind tunnels and Floviz paint, and how if you could visualize the airflow off the cars, when it creates the little vortices, we should probably be leaning into that. So we started collecting a bunch of reference, whether it's F1 cars testing in colder conditions where you see the vortices, or whether it's the little kind of effects that come off the end of jet wings. We started collecting a lot of that imagery, and also wakes coming off of boats, and started talking to Dave about how much or how little of this does he want. And then, of course, the effects artist created some beautiful patterns and beautiful images of how much we wanted to kind of see that. And very quickly, Dave kind of decided to kind of tone it down a little bit and just have it kind of licking off of the kind of wings that we added, that a little bit like kind of cuttlefish on the side. You can kind of see them kind of kicking off of that. But you very quickly understand that they're kind of flying in formation, and almost like kind of how geese fly. Each Purgle that's behind the next as restricting the resistance, the airflow. So that was kind of the vibe we were going for, and it all kind of came together really nicely once we had some of those kind of key elements. I actually have a question for Matt Wood.
Oh yeah, sure.
What was interesting when we were finishing up the season? We got to episode 6, and Dave was working on the edit of the introduction of Thrawn, and there was something he couldn't put. He didn't feel like the entrance was grand enough for the fact that we were building up to this moment after all those episodes, and he was seemingly happy with what was photographed on the day. He was happy with the visual effects, and we had all these troopers out there. But he just felt like that there was something different he could do to really help with that moment, to really kind of introduce him. And he kept playing with the edit, and we did a couple of visual effects things for him, and it just wasn't right. And then one particular day, he added what he felt like, what I felt like was his eureka moment. He said, "It's the sound. It needs to be a sound cue. I need to go work with Matt Wood on this." And he didn't quite know what he was talking about. And then later on, I think at the end of the day, he said, "It's chanting. We need chanting to bring them in." And that for him, that for us, but also that for him, really unlocked that entire sequence. And I think you were there as well. We were fortunate to be in those meetings with various key creatives where we got to kind of give feedback on how the show was feeling at that particular point. And everybody felt it took a huge step forward. What was that like, working with Dave, trying to resolve that issue, and how did it work out?
Yeah, so early on, we knew that there was going to be something special happening when Thrawn was revealed there, when he comes down through all his troops. And we'd been given a click track by Kevin Kiner to sort of a rhythmic highlight of where we should, if we were going to do a chant, where it should be. And so we came up with that additional voices cast. We came up with a lot of lines of dialogue to offset against Enoch's character. So Wes Chatham knew a bunch of drill sergeant type military exercise lines. And so we gave him lines of English, and then we also gave him just we wrote lines that were kind of almost in Sanskrit type evil lines that he could say, similar to something we did on Rise of Skywalker with all the acolytes in the background on the Palpatine scene. So we made these chants out of like 6, I think I had maybe 8 tops of voice actors. And so we just did them over and over again and layered them together off of Wes's dialogue there. But we said things like, we said was it Mithra Narodu or something? It's like Thrawn's full name. We used all these very strange like references that were to Thrawn in the expanded universe. You can't hear completely what's being said, but we just wanted the power of these like the zombie stormtroopers to be just completely entranced by him. And so we did it, and we did it in a cadence that was going to work with Kevin's music, and then it culminates right when he says his first lines of dialogue as he walks up, and but that was everybody working together. I mean, it was like editorial, visual effects, the acting, and the sound and music, all to reveal this character and to make this moment of Thrawn's entrance, which was great to have Dave come and sit and work with us in the mix room. So we had him right there in the carriage house, and so he could come in and work with us on that. It was great.
What was great about that is it completely elevated that scene prior to you ever seeing Thrawn. Because originally, in the original cut, you saw him pretty quickly, whereas now you were kind of building and building and building to that moment. So once we were in a visual effects review, and Dave says, "You guys have got to hear the new sound that we've been working with Matt Wood and the gang. It's great." And as soon as we did, it became pretty clear that we actually needed to increase the number of troopers that we saw in there, because the echo that you're putting in there and the voices and stuff, it was like, this needs now to be a bigger visual to follow the sound as well. So that it was really fun to watch how that was solved in a non-traditional way from my perspective of how you introduced a character. I guess it was a really interesting process to go from one particular reveal to a different one that was all largely sound driven until you see him several shots later.
Right. Yeah. And all done in the post process.
Yeah.
Which is pretty incredible.
Goes back to what you're saying at the start there, just being able to use those tools and having that sort of freedom to have a two-way street between the different departments to achieve the best result. I was also thinking when I was watching back some of Ahsoka today, some of the other organic characters introduced, like the the howlers, these half horse, half dog kind
Yeah.
of creatures. Let's talk about it from the visual effects perspective first of all. Was that a matter of having actors sitting on a gimbal? Was that actual horses? Was it? Well, how did you approach that?
Well, it's a great question, because that was a question that we had in the back of our minds for a very long time. It was I would get, when Dave was writing the first couple of episodes, and we weren't even in prep at that particular point. He would send me texts every now and again and say, "Get ready, we're going to be doing howlers." And so Dave was a howler, and he would send me a sketch that he'd done of what these creatures kind of look like. So very early on, I was kind of processing how we were going to achieve that, and obviously, when you're the size and scale of a movie, a lot of the solutions are pretty easy to find. But I think the fact that we're 8 episodes of a streaming show, and I understand that it's Star Wars, and it's not it's not daytime TV in that regard, but we still have to be very, very conscious of the resources we're using to it, and how we execute. So it was very obvious from the beginning that we were going to need to have a motion base, and obviously working with the special effects departments. It's something that we've done a number of times before. But the question in my mind was, once we start the previous process, if we reach the tipping point of a number of shots where we're galloping, in theory galloping and charging, because you could read on the page these battles that we were going to have, but it's not until Dave really starts crafting the number of shots that you really know what you're going to be doing. Well, as soon as I started seeing the previs, it was very clear that we're going to need to have a different solution on set, that the motion bases weren't going to be able to solve everything. That was going to work great for the close-ups with the principals. And I suggested to Hal and Paul Cavanaugh, the animation supervisors at the beginning of the show, we should probably investigate horses. Now, I understand that the dog anatomy is completely different from a horse, and the gait is different. But that way we can put our actors and our bandits on horses and have that free range of motion. So what we ended up doing was Hal Hickel sourced a number of long takes from various movies that had, riders on horses, whether it was walking, trotting, galloping, and we match animated that we camera matched those takes, and then animators locked the howlers back to the saddle and the rider, and then replaced the horse with the howler moving underneath. And very, very quickly, everybody could see that it was going to work if we made a little bit of a change to the howler anatomy, which is going back to the design with Dave and Doug Chang. But on top of that, we knew we wouldn't be able to make the trot work. That's the unique kind of motion a horse kind of brings. That you can't if a dog does that, it looks strange. It just looks like you're mimicking a horse. So as soon as we kind of landed as soon as we showed Dave and it proved that was going to be the solution, we actually had to change our production workflow, because at the time, I think we were basically earmarking a lot of these scenes for either on the volume or on a stage, because we don't have a lot of space on the backlot, and we had a number of sets taking up that space. But very quickly, we then knew we needed to build a much bigger Peridia landscape on our backlot, and then silk the entire backlot, which is basically putting a tent over the entire thing to cut the direct sun in LA, because we needed the overcast environment to kind of match the environment within the story. So that one decision of, yes, we think we can kind of use horses, had a massive knock-on effect that basically turned the production upside down during filming, because this was we're always working on, solves for episodes 6, 7, and 8 when we're shooting episodes 1, 2, and 3. So, but by the same token, I feel it worked out beautifully, because I just don't know how we would have done. It would have been a lot more all CG, which nobody's a fan of, to be very clear. You want to put the camera in front of the actors on a real environment, and put the creature in it as the visual effects shot, and do as much real as you can, because having the actors just even sitting on the horse and having the horse just stood still, shifting its weight, balancing, dipping its head, shaking its head because it had the reins in there. We translated all that movement through to the howler, which just gave it the realism that we needed, even though they were just stood there. It proved to be incredibly valuable. And we're not the first to do it, but it worked really well for us.
Yeah, it adds that personality, doesn't it? And then Matthew, you and your team come in to give it its voice. It's got kind of unusual, kind of like gurgling, purring sort of sound to it at points. Like, where do you start with a sound like that?
It was funny because it's so based on one of Dave's actual pets. It look. I mean, isn't that the one that looks like Wolfie?
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So Wolfie was one of Dave's dogs, and was over at MBS a lot in the production offices.
Named
and
after
we ended
the
up
Terminator 2 dog, right? Surely.
Oh, well, I know Dave really loves wolves, so I'm not sure if it's. Yeah, Dave's a big wolf fan. So, but we ended up recording a lot of Dave's dog and actually used it for some of the more expressive moments. And then there's also, there's David Acord, the designer, likes to put his cats in the movies whenever he can. His cats have been in like Kylo Ren's lightsaber and also these particular creatures as well. But we wanted to have that, like, that moment when it's trying to sniff out and find the Noti. You want it to be somewhat threatening to the Noti because the Noti kind of jumps back, but you also want it to be not, you're going to have to love these characters too. So we didn't want it to be like horrific. So it was that balance finding between like watching, and we'd watch what would come back from ILM based on some temp sounds we'd put in, and we would actually, do we want it to be more cute there? Or do we want it to be a little more menacing there? And then where the breaths are in terms of where the, the actual snorts are. And so Dave Filoni was definitely involved in all the crafting of that. And just, I think because we had him there, I mean, it was so nice to have him be able to work in his production office at the ranch and just walk down. We were right in the basement. He would come down and give us notes. And I could tell he was just having a good time playing in the sound. In the sound environment with his favorite players.
That is another really good example of the back and forth, because again, during our visual effects reviews, Dave would often say, you need to get the new sound from Matt because there's a moment in there with a breath or a snort or a moment when the creature starts to calm down and you can hear it calming down, and he wants to make sure that the animation kind of feeds into that. So to Matt's point, Wolfie was a lot of the reference for this particular creature. We even put Wolfie in a photo booth down in LA to capture photography of him to understand exactly how the hair flowed. And it was really funny because, was it funny? I guess it was funny. When we were working on the what we call the groom, right? So when ILM works on designing the hair, it's called the groom, where you basically grow the hair out on the particular creature and you work on exactly how tangled it is, or how floppy it is, or how matted it is. And every now and again, it wasn't a long process, but Dave would see the latest work in progress of what the hair looked like, and then he would look down at his dog and say, no, it's matted like this on his back. I'm thinking, that's because he's lying down, Dave, and you haven't washed him in a couple of weeks. But when the reference we sent, he was a lot cleaner. So we would work with Dave, but to his credit, Dave arrived at an approved look really, really quickly. But again, to Matt's point, it was all about kind of Dave bringing his understanding of his relationship with his dogs over the years and putting it into that creature, because there's such an interesting relationship between Sabine and the Howler in episode 6, where she's first introduced and you think this is a menacing creature. Is he going to eat her or is he going to help her? And then throughout the course of that particular episode, it abandons her during a battle with the bandits and kind of leaves. And then she scolds her and refuses to kind of, to ride the creature or be anything or having to do the creature. And it walks along behind her, for example, or tried to kind of win back her affection. So all of that comes, the reference that we received from Dave was all about, humans' relationship with their dogs, with their pets. And, it's not a surprise to hear that Dave was referencing that kind of stuff with Matt for the sound as well.
Yeah. Yep. Were you going to say something, Matt? Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just saying, yeah, it's just, we literally recorded his dog for it. So, yeah, he's definitely in there. Definitely in there.
So looking, as everyone is now, to season 2, despite the fact we have a new and current Star Wars series in The Acolyte, people have got Ahsoka season 2 on their mind. From your perspective, behind the scenes there, do you go ahead with these techniques that you've kind of created in season 1 and optimize and shoot with using all those same techniques? Or, are we expecting lots of curveballs from different things from Dave and co? But then again, you always strike me, people that I've spoken to at Skywalker Sound and ILM and Lucasfilm, you always strike me as people who relish that kind of challenge. Where is that sort of sweet spot between, taking all of that technology that you've created for the first season and creating a smooth process for the next season, and also kind of being ready for the big challenges ahead?
For sound, I think it's in the staffing and the people, because it's that I'd love to get people that have come through what we've already experienced, and also it's a great opportunity to sometimes bring new people in too, because Star Wars, a lot of people want to work on it, and it's a lot of people's dream to work on it. So I'd love to be able to facilitate that and also bring new energy into the project and get people to have ideas or something they might have seen in a previous thing that really affected them as a fan, and then we're like, oh, let's highlight a little bit more of that. And but we have, obviously it all starts with a script, and don't really have that yet. At least I don't. So, but yes, new challenges are an amazing part of the job. I love it when there's a new creature or a new location or a new mode of transportation or something, or a new environment that we get to be part of, and how to incorporate that into our universe is always a really fun challenge for us.
Well, if you need an emotionally ambiguous British voice, then do give me a call. I'm
yes,
available.
Indeed.
And Richard, what about you in terms of the visual effects side of things for the next season?
It's interesting. From through the Mando projects into Boba Fett and Ahsoka, they've all been back to back and largely overlapping, and I'm sure it's the same thing for Matt too, and everybody at Sky Sound. Because we did have the strike right at the end of production, it delayed everything a little bit, and that provided me almost a year of working on different projects within ILM, and working with lots of different people, and very, very different kind of executables. So it allowed me to kind of just take a look at the state of the industry, the visual effects, kind of where we're going, what's new. And I'll be honest, I've been really pleasantly surprised with some of the new techniques and some of the new technology that the ILM, as well as the Disney research team, are developing, because quite a number of them are immediately applicable to what Dave's going to want to do with season 2, with at least what I know about that show right now. So it's not necessarily, it's more of a case of how do we continue to do things better, and free up time and resources to continue to raise the bar. Because what we did in season 1, we can't just repeat that. It's got to be better, and it's got to be much better, because that's what everybody's expectation is, and that's what it's like working for ILM over the years. And so for me, it's been a case of let's kind of see how everybody else is working on projects and productions that I haven't really had access to, and I can go check out all the movies that we've worked on for a little while and find out exactly how they were done, and just take the best methods and the best techniques and see what everybody's developing and start applying it. So Dave can be bolder with his storytelling, and he can come back to either me or Matt and say, yeah, don't worry, we can figure out a solution for that.
Well, guys, I appreciate your work, and I appreciate your time today. Thanks for chatting.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation there with Matthew and Richard. I did chat to them a bit afterwards, actually, and sort of suggested that maybe they should come on the podcast in the future as a kind of standalone episode for each of them, talking about their careers, because it's interesting to me that Richard is a British guy from Rotherham. He's ended up working for the very top end of the industry for Lucasfilm, and also Matthew Wood. He started as somebody who was working for LucasArts testing games, and now he's a very well respected supervising sound editor. So I think that would be 2 interesting conversations right there. If you've been watching on social media, that's on Twitter @JamieSWB, and on Facebook, the Filmumentaries page. And in fact, if you've listened to any episodes recently, you'll know that I've spoken again to Nilo Rodis Jamiro, designer on The Empire Strikes Back, costume designer on Return of the Jedi, worked in video games for a number of years, and he's just one of my favourite people. So Nilo and I had a 3-hour conversation. Again, it was over the telephone, as before. I'm not sure he was sat in a cupboard this time. I don't know if you long-term listeners remember. Nilo was sat in a cupboard for 2 hours last time we did it, just because he wanted to dull the sound of some work that was going on over the road from where he was talking to me from. So yeah, he doesn't really have the tech to hand, so it is over the phone. So it's taken a bit longer and a bit more work to get this conversation usable and workable. I think I'm going to do that over 2 episodes. So the second episode of this month, June 2024, in 10 or 12 days or so, you're going to hear Nilo part 1 talking about Miyazaki, talking about Mr. Tamiya, and being in Japan and seeing both of those incredible legends, working for EA Sports and revolutionizing how they looked at video games, talking about George Lucas and Phil Tippett and how Phil blew his mind in terms of design and how to approach things. Yeah, a really fun conversation, and lots more to come. I'm interviewing Steve Sansweet next week, the boss at Rancho Obi-Wan, which I was lucky enough to visit back in April. I've also got Aggie Rogers, costume designer, coming on. I'd actually booked her for June the 10th, and then I put it in my calendar as July the 10th. So that was my mistake, but she was very gracious and said the 10th of July looks good for her, so we're going to go ahead with that. I've also got another ILM VFX wizard, Andrew Whitehurst. He has an amazing filmography too. So lots of guests in the pipeline. And yeah, some other projects that I'm chipping away at, as always, here at Benning Towers. I don't live in Towers. But lots of things chipping away at, and hopefully some good news regarding some of those projects soon. So do keep listening and do keep supporting the podcast. You can do that via Patreon, patreon.com/Jamie Benning. Or you could just kind of, write a review, share, tell people about this great podcast that you love. This entire podcast is produced, directed, edited, marketed. I book all the guests and everything, all by me, Jamie Benning, with music from Michael Hewitt-Brown and the assistance of the friendly team at ILM and Skywalker Sound for this particular episode. So thank you to them. And thank you for joining me. And I hope you can do so for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.
Weirding